Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 75th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our panel discussion twice monthly to practice and demonstrate open-minded discussion. We know that we can grow as individuals through honest consideration of the opinions of others, and that to do less is to stifle our intellectual and moral growth. Today's topic is there a better way to select a president? Our panel is going to wrestle with that, and beginning on my left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist, an all-around Renaissance man. I have to throw that in from time to time. On his left is Jerry Ritzman, chairman of the board and partner of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan, every 4 years we watch the presidential selection process that seems too long, too expensive, and lacking in substance. By the time of the general election in November, the candidates have been so beat up by each other with their attack and counterattack methods that many voters are completely turned off by the process and by the candidates. This year it appears that the process has sunk to new depths. Is there a better way, or does this system ultimately serve up the best possible person to lead our country?
Well, you hope it does. One of the issues that I think has come to play is the 24-hour news cycle, and we've talked about this before, and it's taken the the reins of these particular types of situations, and because candidates can only speak in 20 or 30-second bites, the interest of the voter, or the interest of the TV, all the different news channels is very low, so all you get is sound bites. Right now we have I call it the reality TV political environment with several of the individuals that are running, one in particular. So I think media
You're allowed to say Trump.
Okay, well I really don't want to. I don't want to give him any more free media.
Okay.
He has enough free media right now.
Yeah.
I really think that if we focus on looking at how things roll out, so I would agree that when you look at the primary process, it is long. Other countries have much shorter primary processes. It seems as though we're constantly in an election cycle, whether it's a senator or a congressman or a president every 4 years. It seems as though they start basically running for office the minute they get in office. So I really think if we look at it and say to ourselves, can we tweak it some? Can we maybe shorten the process a little bit and have more informative types of situations? I don't know how much you get out of a debate, and you have 26 of them or 25 of them, and it's almost like a Jerry Springer show, and I'm not that much of a fan of Jerry Springer, but they just go at each other, and I don't know if that really serves anyone. I really would like to hear more of what the policies and what they feel are their solutions to the problems that we have. Now, on the other side, it seems as though the folks on the other side of the aisle, our Democratic friends, and I call them my friends, they've been able to winnow down the field dramatically. I think they started out with, 3 or 4? I'll let Patty and speak to that.
I think there were 4.
Was there 4?
Yeah.
Might have been 4. We're down to 2 now, and their forums and debates and their town hall meetings seem to be fairly civil. Mr. Sanders seems to be taking off the gloves a little bit, but it's pretty obvious, I think, just to the casual observer, who's going to be their nominee. So I think, if we sort of move to the middle. Now, I did a little bit of research on this, and even back in the day, Abraham Lincoln's day, they really focused on the newspaper and there were some pretty scathing things written about the candidates. But you know, they didn't have a 24-hour news cycle. The paper got printed a couple times a day if they were lucky. They went on these long train tours, whistle stop tours, where they stopped and they had a sort of an informal debate. I don't think we'll ever have another Lincoln Douglas debate. I don't know how many hours that lasted.
It's like 7 or something.
Seven or so hours. I don't think anybody could. People can't even sit in church for an hour. How do they expect to, you know, how do they expect to sit through a debate for 6 or 7 hours while they go piece by piece? So we have some room that we can improve on the overall process, but I think it's sort of like salmon swimming upstream. It is a difficult process, and I think it should be to elect a president.
Well, we'll talk about how it got to where it is in a little bit, but Ron, where are you coming from?
Well, I'm one of those that gets pretty much turned off by it. I even started monitoring my phone messages, my phone recently, because, you know, most of the recorded ones don't go through, and if someone likes me, they'll talk to me. But yeah, and the odd is our monitor usually gives us a couple of thought starters, a couple of things, and I noticed even in the Beacon Journal, Akron Beacon Journal on Tuesday, there was a letter to the editor. A gentleman put forth a procedure, and he wanted to do it kind of like a sporting event where you'd start with, say, 10 candidates on each side. You window down through a series of semifinals until you get to the end. I thought that was pretty interesting. But no one is really addressing, as Bryan says, there's the 24-hour news cycle, no one is really addressing the length and the expense of this. And competition is good, don't get me wrong. You need to have candidates. I think you probably need to have more voices from minor candidates. The Green Party, the Libertarians, the Communists, whoever wants to get up there and talk and promote themselves for the president, I think needs to be given some opportunity. That's not going to happen under the present system. It's too expensive. No one has the money to do that unless you're backed by huge organizations. Campaign finance reform is a whole other topic, and we might want to get into that sometime. So I don't know. There's all kinds of systems put out there where you would try to winnow this down in stages over a period of time, or you would limit the amount of money that goes into it. The one process give each character, each of the final 4 or 5 candidates $2 million in 2 months to spend it. Well, I give you about 30 seconds on TV these days. But something of that sort. It's too long. It costs too much. I don't know what to do about it. We do have a representative democracy here. I don't know that the electoral college system is the best, but it does kind of give us that representation. Of course, that stems from the colonial days, and you had to get on your horse and ride 3 days before you got to where you could vote. So set that up. We don't have that now. Maybe we should register electronically or by mail if we don't have computers. Not everybody does, certainly. We should be able to vote electronically and by computer, by mail. If
We will
wished.
eventually, I think.
Yeah, and do that sort of thing. Simplify it and speed it up, make it last not quite so long, and give the candidates a chance to be more substantive in what they say. It's not happening.
Jerry, what do you think?
Well, we talk about being more substantive. It's even if the candidates were more substantive, I wonder if the electorate would take time to examine and consider what their points are. I wonder if the atmosphere of the campaign that we've been going through reflects the mood of the country, or if the mood of the country reflects how the campaign is being waged. And I would have to think that I would think that the campaign reflects the mood of the country. People staking out positions that they don't want to move on, people being easily offended by little things that should, in my mind, be brushed off. So it will eventually work itself out, and whoever's elected, I have to think that I have enough faith in the Constitution and the separation of powers. And if there's a paralysis in Washington, D.C., is that altogether bad? And let the ground swell or the grassroots take care of what's going on in the country if they aren't going to do anything. But it's a reflection of the ouchiness, the contentiousness that's throughout a lot of our country today.
We're going to get back to that in a bit. Do you sign on to the idea that if government shuts down completely, that's a good thing?
Not totally a good thing. I mean, but as far as enacting new regulations, laws, so forth, I don't know if that's a bad thing.
Patty, you've got more experience than anybody on the panel in actually trying to get elected. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, as far
we're
as
talking about presidential.
Yeah, as far as
you haven't
experience
done
running
that
for
yet.
office, it's never easy. And you're trying to convince people that you're the best person for the job, and it's amazing how much literature out there is as to how to do this and how many times to approach a voter and what works best, whether it's signs or one-on-one contact. Presidential is even more outlandish. I agree with so much that's been said here. You know, when Bryan talked about the 24-hour news cycles, they're giving us all these little sound bites, and it's constant, and it goes on for 2 years, what the candidates are doing. And, you know, very honestly, I don't care that Lewandowski was accused of battery with this woman. I believe, though, they're not going to charge him. That's coming out today.
I heard that this morning, yeah.
You know, that's not a story for me. I don't really care that Hillary Clinton had to swipe her subway card 5 times through the turnstile. That's not a story, but that's what we're given. I think that we need to shorten the time span for the primary season and keep it on a substantive basis. And this would require the help of the news people to make sure that when they do broadcast a story, that it's an interview with the candidate, that it's about issues, that it's not about this superfluous stuff that comes out there for everyone to listen to. Ron mentioned campaign finance reform. Money is a big issue because the extended period of time, which is not the case. Like in England, I think it's a month that they have. Because of that extension of time, the amounts of money required are enormous. Of course, this campaign is interesting because for the first time, it doesn't appear the most money makes you the winner, i.e. Jeb Bush, who had the most money going in, but somehow couldn't catch on with voters. I've heard, I also think there needs to be some sort of consistency between states in how the primaries are won. You know, all the hoopla about Colorado recently in the Republican primary. And, you know, there's 2 ways to look at it. Those were the rules that were set up. But they were set up so that the average voter had no say into who their party would nominate. And I realize, and I've heard speculation, that the parties are private organizations. They can set up any rules that they want, and they're allowed to do this, but the voter is also a member of that organization and should have some input. But there needs to be some consistency. Just look at the difference between a primary and a caucus. I mean, and caucuses are amazing. I'm so glad we don't have that in Ohio because we actually have some say. So those are some of my thoughts.
Jerry, you speculated whether or not voters would really pay any attention to substantive.
Yes.
And as a liberal with a faith in human nature, I'd like to say yes, we would.
Right.
I would like to see that to happen. However, I do wonder. But on the other hand, if you compress it a bit, you have more opportunity to. Maybe you'll miss a particular debate that you really wanted to hear, but it should be reported well beyond that, and it should give you more of an opportunity to get a little more deeply into what's being said if you're not bombarded with it 24 hours a day in 20-second intervals.
Well, you get sick
And
of it.
I would
yeah.
agree, Ron, and I think in thinking back to what Patty said about swiping the card or the guy being charged and so forth, for people who for some reason have some sense of urgency about deciding upon a candidate, maybe these are things that say, boy, I'd never vote for that person that can't,
Yeah.
you know, those are shallow reasons to help people make a decision why they're for or against somebody.
But are they good reasons?
No, they're not. I don't. They are not good reasons, but it may satisfy certain individuals to say, that's why I like or don't like so and so, rather than going to the more substantive.
The issues. Yeah.
Jerry, you put a lot of the responsibility on the voters. And when I think about studies that have shown the large percentage of voters, excuse me, who are so uninformed that they think Ben Franklin was president, and that New Mexico is a foreign country, or that you can take night courses at the Electoral College. These people vote. Is there any chance that we would begin to disenfranchise people who, for all practical purposes, are irresponsible voters? Would that ever fly?
No, I don't believe so. I think we're all created equal politically, and that we should have that opportunity. Those people that want to go to the Electoral College for a degree probably aren't voting.
Well, you know, we have one of the lowest participation rates for voting, I think, in the
So it's self-selection.
In the world.
In the world.
Yeah.
It's like 30%.
It's really low.
It's really low.
The primary's less. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, it's such a low, and that's sad because, you know, that's one of your constitutional rights is to vote, and if you don't take it seriously, we get into all this identity, affinity sort of voting, and where people just vote for a particular cause or for a particular group, and
Single issue voters.
single issue,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's sad because we really need to take the time to understand what people are telling us and looking at things and being a little more discreet and a little more willing to invest the time to figure out what is really going on in the country. I'm not sure, do they even have civics classes anymore?
Oh, yes.
You know.
Really?
Well,
Yes, they still teach government.
yeah, and I think some of our candidates that we have on our side of the aisle need to go back to school and take a civics class. The one who's our, you know, currently running, he doesn't
can say
You
his
can
name.
say Trump.
I'm not saying it. I'm not saying his name because he's got the Fox News network on. You know, I don't know how many times he's been on there, over 40 times. But the fact of the matter is, when you don't understand the difference between a majority and a plurality, and you don't understand the difference between the primary rules in Colorado and the rules in Ohio, and you don't take the time to get out the best people to run your campaign to get your message at, and all you're doing is, you know, beating that dead horse about a wall and all that kind of stuff. I just think I just lose interest in that.
You know,
that to me
the
is
concern with some of that, though, you know, with all the differences, is particularly in Colorado, is what you're doing is putting that entire primary process in the hands of a few people, and they are making the selections, and you don't know who those people are, and I don't know who they are, and so that whole choice for everything that's done is left in the hands of a few people. Like, you know, they talk about the smoke-filled rooms.
Well,
where
isn't
the
that a
decisions were
representative
made.
part of the though? Here, and we elect our local officials, we elect our state officials. Why not let them choose the candidate?
well,
And
I get
I'm not-
to further the point. When you have a closed primary and people are going in asking, and they complain that your name wasn't on my ballot. Well, you registered as a Democrat, and in a closed primary, you're not going to see Republican names on a Democratic ballot.
They
You
ought
know,
to go
and
to
that
the
was news to them.
electoral
Yeah.
college and take a course in
And that
civics.
was news to him, and that hit the news cycle, is that there were people disenfranchised because they went in to vote in their primary,
Well, that's
and the
just-
Republicans and the Republican name wasn't on there because they're a Democrat.
You know,
It's a
Ohio
closed
is
primary.
interesting because it's considered a closed primary because you don't get a sheet with everybody's name on it. but you can indicate your party the day of the election.
Yeah.
And by the
I
way,
have
the
several
primary
friends who- I
turnout.
have several friends who switched from Democrat to Republican so they could vote against Mr. Trump.
Having worked the polls, I can tell you
Why'd you
there
say
were a
that?
great many Democrats that switched to Republican.
And you're allowed to do that in Ohio?
And you're allowed to do it the
election
day.
day?
Now, it
Well,
used
they
to
asked me
be
what I wanted to do.
that you could do it, but you had to take an oath that you were actually going to become a member of that party. Now you don't even have to do that, it's just you say it. Now, other states like New York, you have to have designated your party a certain amount of time
Ahead of
time, which was unfortunate for a couple of your front runners.
But that just
children.
goes to my point that they don't even understand the process.
Yeah.
And the process was in place. It's a two-party system. It's been with us for how many hundreds of years? And if you don't get it by now, I'm not sure you should be voting. So
Let me ask this question. It seems like most of the alternative plans that people put forth want to put some kind of limits on the time, the length of the campaign, or the amount of money that is spent.
Yeah.
Is there any way you could possibly enforce anything like that?
No.
No. If I wanted to run for president and I'm not allowed to campaign until May the 1st, and here it is January, I can stand on a stump and give all the speeches I want, can't
That's
I?
probably true, yeah.
And who's going to control the amount of money that I'm allowed to spend? I mean,
I think of limits that are put on high school sports as to how long they can practice before a season. And, like for basketball, I remember years ago it was a park in Barberton that if you wanted to play basketball for that team under this particular coach who was well known in the town, you'd better show up there in the summer and
pick up
basketball.
Yeah.
Coach couldn't be there, but he'd have somebody there watching, and if you weren't there, you weren't going to make the team. There's always ways around things on limits. So
The major reason that we got into primaries in the first place was trying to take the decisions for selecting candidates out of the hands of the party bosses, the smoke-filled rooms,
Right.
and put it in the hands of the people. And it's kind of interesting, the history of primaries. I think the first one was, the first real state primary was Oregon in 1912. But before that, back in the 1800s, there was a party primary, the Anti-Masonic Party, decided they were going to have their own convention. But interestingly enough, and especially how the numbers work out, by 1912 there were 12 states that had primaries. By 1920 there were 20 states. Thought that was kind of an interesting play on numbers. But after 1920, a lot of the states backed off. I suspect the hand of the party bosses in eliminating those primaries. And it wasn't until Eisenhower that the primaries actually had some kind of an influence, but not the kind you wanted. We went into the Republican convention in '52 with after primaries, and Ohio Senator Taft, Robert Taft, had won most of the primaries, but not enough to get the magic number. And the smiling, grandfatherly Eisenhower won then. But when in 1968, at the Democrat convention, which was one of the most horrendous conventions ever held, there were probably 5 candidates that had won a state primary. Hubert Humphrey wasn't one of them, but he was the delegate. He went in without any, excuse me, he was the candidate, but he went in without any delegates in the primary system. It's only been in recent years that these things have become important. I'm just cynical enough to suspect the hand of wealthy media types. When we talk about it being very, very expensive, who winds up with the money?
Yeah.
Media.
Was that your son that was here?
Yes.
he brought that up. I watched that program.
Yeah.
I thought it was, you know, honest of him to say, it's good business.
It is for him.
It's good business for him, and it's good business for Fox and CNN and all these to basically keep this going. And I think they have a hand in this. They've created some situations, a monster, and I think they need to look at their part in this.
Isn't there an equal time rule? Didn't there used to be an equal time rule on media?
I
How
think
does that
yeah,
work?
Briefly,
boy.
it was called the Fairness in Broadcasting Rule, and it was put in by the Democrats to stifle Rush Limbaugh.
Well, that
For
was
the most-
smart. No.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good.
It didn't last very long. What it demanded was that the networks give free time to anybody that wanted to disagree with what they had heard on the radio. It only lasted about one session of Congress.
I thought it was still in place to some degree, and I've heard it referenced on I mean, obviously it's not, because the proportional way the time has been divvied up on stations is way out of line.
Excuse me. But anyway, the early delegates to conventions were chosen by the states, and within the states there were districts. But things have evolved over time, and I think it's kind of interesting that on the Republican side, they have delegates that are elected, and then there are only three, I'll call them delegates at large. But on the Democrat side, there are just a slew of them. It's practically every elected
The
Democrat
superdelegates,
official.
you mean?
Yeah, and there are just a whole lot of them. But there are too many complaints about the system. I thought it was interesting. I just heard this morning that, well, the name will not be mentioned.
Exactly.
Was complaining about the system being rigged. He got 100% of the delegates in Florida and only 40% of the votes. But anyway, so it was rigged in his favor. Someone asked me, this is a quote from Dean Koontz. Someone asked me about the current about the current choice we're given in the presidential election, and he said, "Well, it's like the two scariest movies I can imagine." Thank you very much. I think we